Hi everyone, Shane R. Monroe here. We need a few disclaimers before we continue the video. Now, I'm a 30-plus year emulation guru with dozens of hours of research under my belt, but I am not a lawyer, copyright or otherwise. This video does not constitute legal advice. Copyright laws vary from country to country, and today our video focuses on the United States and the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, Section 12. That said, everybody knows that emulators, like guns, ice picks, and axes, are legal. However, just like those other things, emulation can be used in an illegal way, and let's be honest, that's how most of us use it. If the systems you're interested in emulating are not included in this video, it is very likely they are fully legal to emulate, at least where the DMCA is concerned. But regardless of whether you own the system in question and/or even own the games in question, trafficking BIOS and ROMs from the internet is always illegal. In many cases, it's legal to dump your own files, but in many cases, it is not. All right, now the disclaimers are out of the way, let's get to the show.
Let's go into the Monroe world.
All right, so let's take a look at what we've got. So what you're seeing here is pretty much every system that is potentially illegal to emulate. It's pretty much all of them. I mean, anything of a more modern generation. But let's start from the top, kind of work our way down, and we're going to talk about a couple of particulars that may be of interest to you. Maybe you didn't know. I certainly didn't know. I learned a few new things while researching this video. So 8-bit and 16-bit computers from the old school days, Commodore 64, Apple IIe, Atari 800, blah, blah, blah. These are all firmware and BIOS files. These are all unencrypted. So while it may be an intellectual property strike to take that content, it is not encrypted, so you're not violating the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. Same with the Amiga, although I do want to point out that there is a license holder that still sells Amiga BIOS firmware. It's called Kickstart. So if you self-dump yourself, you're not going to run into any problems with encryption. But if you distribute it or give it away or something like that, you have to self-dump to make that happen. Now, when it comes to disk images or ROMs, when it comes to early computers, 16, 8-bit computers, it's possible that there could be encryption on some of these disks, and by bypassing those encryptions to play the disk on the emulator, you could be looking in illegal territory. So that's worth looking at. Now, let's take a run down the list here. PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, Dreamcast, PlayStation 4 and 5, the entire Xbox line, the Nintendo DSi, but not the DS, GameCube, Wii and Wii U, various arcade platforms. A lot of people don't think about arcade games as being a potential issue when it comes to Digital Millennium Copyright Act violation, but we're going to talk about that. 3DS, of course, the Switch, and the Sony PSP. Now, chances are likely, if the platform you're interested in is not on this list, it's a pretty good chance you're safe. But again, I am not a lawyer. So let's start off here with the PS2. There's a few of these that are in blue, and there's a reason for that, and I'll get to that. The BIOS for the Sony PlayStation 2 is encrypted. However, emulators that use the Sony PS2's BIOS file leaves it in an encrypted state, which means you do not have to decrypt it once you dump it. Now, that's providing you dump it yourself, right? If you dump your own BIOS file, it stays encrypted and the emulator continues to use it in its encrypted format, legal. Now, of course, the disk images are unencrypted. Again, if you're downloading from the internet, that's not legal. If you have your own disk and you dump the disk, that's apparently legal because you are not circumventing any sort of encryption. PlayStation 3, amazingly enough, is exactly the same way. If you dump yourself or you get legal sources, you can indeed get a BIOS. However, the games are encrypted. So there's no way to not violate the Digital Millennium Copyright Act if you're playing PS3 games. It's just that simple, right? So you can't play any commercial games. You can play homebrew games. And if you dump your own BIOS or obtain the firmware files that you need legally. So that means it's pretty much off the table. Pretty much anything that has at least one red item is off the table for legal emulation, at least in the manner that we tend to play them. So let's talk about the Sega Dreamcast. Absolutely no way to play this without violating the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. The BIOS file is encrypted. Emulators need a decrypted BIOS. And of course, all of the GD-ROM files are encrypted. You'll have to break decryption to play those games. Hence, it is no go for the Dreamcast. Sony PlayStation 4 and 5 should be very obvious. Everything is protected out the yin-yang with both of those. Those will never be legal. Xbox Series, Xbox 360, the One, X, S, you name it. They have encryption. They have security measures, which is also a violation. If you bypass certain security measures, you will also violate the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. Of course, the games are all encrypted as well. So there's no legal recourse here. Nintendo DSi, same thing. The BIOS is encrypted and the games are encrypted. Because of that, there is no legal way to play DSi, at least not that I was able to find. Now, the regular DS is okay. It has neither of these. So DS is pretty much good to go. GameCube, you think you're in the clear because the internal BIOS is not encrypted, so you could dump it. But unfortunately, the games are encrypted, and there's encryption via drive security, so it's hardware drive security. And in order to play a GameCube game, you must break the law and get an unencrypted or decrypt your own discs, which of course is in violation of Digital Millennium Copyright Act. So GameCube's out the door too. Wii and Wii U, that should be obvious. This is also illegal, despite the fact that Dolphin embeds the key inside of its emulator. There's still decryption going on, and while Nintendo has not prosecuted them yet, I think that we could see something interesting in that vein. Of course, the games are encrypted. Again, if either one of these is red, you're done. Arcade platforms, of course, all of the classic stuff, the Z80 stuff, the early stuff, all you're worried about is IP infringement, right? So Donkey Kong, the original Donkey Kong arcade game, probably safe, but Nintendo could still come after you for utilizing their IP in an inappropriate way. But it's not a violation of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which is what we're talking about today. However, there are arcade platforms, the Sega Naomi, Capcom CPS-3, Taito Type X. These are all very, very much protected, encrypted. They put that suicide solder on the outside so you can't dig the BIOS file out to decrypt it, all sorts of crazy stuff. So there's plenty of security measures that make these all legal no-nos. Nintendo DS. Now, here's the deal here. The BIOS is encrypted, and popular emulators continue to use the encrypted BIOS. So if you dump your own BIOS, right, and leave it encrypted, which will still work with the emulators, that's legal. But because you need keys, decryption keys for the games, and if you decrypt the game, of course, you're in violation of Digital Millennium Copyright Act. So Nintendo DS, while you can get around the BIOS encryption problem, the games are still encrypted, so you can play homebrew. Yeah, who cares? All right, Switch, of course, there's no way. There's absolutely zero way to make Switch emulation legal. Not if you own the Switch, not if you own the games. There's so many violations of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act in Switch emulation, it's not even worth discussing, to be honest. PSP, sort of the same thing, right? If you dump your own BIOS file, that's more or less legal because PPSSPP will use the encrypted file. Now, I'm told that if you dump your encrypted games, that you can use those encrypted games with PPSSPP and it will decrypt them using your own BIOS. A little bit of legal ambiguity here. I would say, erring on the side of caution, I would say PSP games are illegal to emulate, commercial games. You could probably dump the BIOS and play homebrew emulators, etc. on your PSP, but I think that's where it ends. Now, I'm sure the PS Vita for some reason didn't show up on my list when I was doing my research, but I'm 100% sure that it falls into the same category as some of these other ones. At least one side will be encrypted, which means you have to break the law in order to emulate PS Vita games outside of homebrew. So what are we coming up here, right? So what's legal? You can dump content that stays encrypted. So remember I did the MIG switch video, the MIG switch dumper video, where I showed you were able to actually pull the game file off of a Nintendo Switch cartridge, but the file stays encrypted. Because the file stays encrypted and no decryption was happening, it's legal. So you can legally archive your Nintendo Switch games. You just can't play them. Emulation using encrypted user-provided BIOS and unencrypted games. So you can use emulators like these ones in blue because they do allow you to dump your own BIOS, keep them in an encrypted format, but you have to have unencrypted games, which pretty much only leaves the PlayStation 2 in the lines of legal emulation. So, of course, what's not legal? Breaking or decrypting emulation or encryption, as we've talked about. Bypassing DRM outside of encryption is a legally gray area. There is verbiage in the Digital Millennium Copyright Act that they will discuss bypassing security measures, which could be read as copy protection, all sorts of other things, which would indeed violate Digital Millennium Copyright Act. So there's a wide swath of legalese that can be used against legalized emulation. And of course, decrypting, downloading, or playing of any games, encrypted or otherwise, really, because you're trafficking illegal content. So that's really what it is. Now, as sad as this is and as creepy and as bad as this looks, what you're not seeing are all the things that are legal, of which there are probably hundreds of systems that you can legally emulate that don't fall into this category. Of course, most people are wanting to play something in one of these categories. So, again, are the police coming for you if you download a BIOS file or illegal games? Probably not. And if you own the game and you own the system and somebody caught you pilfering ROMs for those games or for the BIOS files for those systems, would somebody come after you litigiously? Probably not. Me personally, you do you. I'll do me. And maybe I better rephrase that. No, what I'm saying is, morally, if you own the system and the game, I personally believe it's your right to do whatever you want. If you want to play a Switch game on a PC and you own the Switch and you own the Switch game and you want to play it in higher resolution with better frame rate on your PC, good Lord, that should be allowed. I'm telling you legally that it's not. Listen, I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, like, subscribe, hit the bell. You guys know what to do. I'm Shane R. Monroe. Thanks so much for watching. Take care, and we'll see you next time.